Picasso, from quite early on, started painting pictures of Harlequin. He seems to emerge out of the circus acrobat world. Quite often there's hidden numeric devices in these images. The number 4 is a feature that pops up time and again. It keeps reappearing. So who is this? You know, who is the Harlequin? And this is the thing. We've got this strange, long-beaked suggestion of a face with a long slit eye here, and resting on its arm. If you can imagine that we're looking from above down onto Harlequin's hat, you'd see something like this. This long-beaked character that Picasso has extruded from the Harlequin, it's a representation of the god Thoth, who was responsible for art in the mythology of ancient Egypt. Later in life, Picasso paints himself over and over and over again as Thoth. In these artist and model series, he's doing exactly the same thing in the way that the ancient Egyptians pictorialized Thoth. He's holding a stylus or a brush, he's writing or doing something with this brush, and Picasso plays with this similarity in imagery. Picasso was very conversant with ancient Egyptian stuff. He'd been a lot, I think, to the Louvre and places. He'd studied this because it does re-emerge all through his work. There are associations with ancient Egypt. So here we have an intentional image of the Harlequin in the form of Thoth, who was supposedly responsible for the creation of civilization. According to their mythology, he gave them writing, which was a form of magic. One only has to extend that concept to pictorial imagery. Egyptian writing was hieroglyphic in its formal presentation. The hieroglyphic imagery would have been the grandfather of pictorial art. We've got an association between Harlequin and Thoth. Now, how could that be? The rationale is through an intermediary, and that intermediary would be Mercury. And in the Greek pantheon, Hermes. Who was Hermes? Well, according to the ancients, Hermes was Thoth. We've got very similar attributes given to all of these characters. They were very strongly associated with magic. Now, how would Harlequin be associated with Mercury? Well, in the alchemical tradition, Harlequin was adopted by Mercury and empowered with extraordinary magical powers, which allowed him to take any form, shape-shift, become invisible at will, appear anywhere in the world at any time. Because of the hat, he's associated with triangles, it's linked to pyramids, it roots him back with Thoth and architecture and Egypt. To come back to what we're looking at, we've got a picture of Thoth wearing the Harlequin hat, resting on his elbow. It's cartoon-like. What he's looking at are two other characters, one here and another here. These characters are, again, very cartoon-like. They're very dark. The fruit suddenly becomes a pair of eyes. Again, we're looking at Egypt, you know, where you have a human body with an animal head. We're going now to jump down the rabbit hole of Les Demoiselles. Having the picture's been rotated over to the right, we're looking at the character peering in from under the curtain. We're looking at a one-eyed mask of Harlequin. The reason why it's one eye goes back to numerous pictures by Picasso where one eye's been pulled out, or an eye's been blocked off, or he's got a patch over one eye. There's all kinds of referential material referencing this idea of one eye. So it's part of the blindness theme that we saw in the previous commentary. He's continuing it, but now what he's drawing in is the Egyptian associations that relate to Harlequin. So we've got this suggestion of characters who all have similar characteristics. So we've got the Harlequin, we've got Thoth, we've got Hermes, we've got Mercury, and so on and so forth. In amongst that group, we have Odin, the northern counterpart of Hermes, and he pulled out one of his eyes in a sort of ritual descent into the underworld to gain the knowledge of the runes. So on the right, we have this eye looking at us, and on the left, we have a suggestion of pyramids. In the Egyptian mythologies, we have another one-eyed character, Horus, the Eye of Horus, which was plucked out in a battle with Set. The characters being looked at by the Egyptian god Thoth represent Horus and Set. Picasso created this narrative inside Les Demoiselles in which he's presenting us with something along the lines of a cartoon. Because as we go into this, you're going to start to see that these images are all linked together. We've got a lot of Egyptian associations. If you know a little bit about Picasso, there was always this sort of interplay between the forces of dark and light. And this is exactly the story of Set and Horus. What we're looking at is the picture flipped over again to the right. Picasso loved skulls. He was always mucking about with skulls and creating all kinds of distorted skulls. This would not be at all uncharacteristic. We've got the suggestion of a nose in the right place. We've got two eyes. We've got a suggestion of sort of eyebrowy type features. The mouth is certainly suggested, and the general shape of the skull, one of Picasso's favourite motifs. Now, we've got the drapery here highlighted. This is some of the drapery. Here's the remainder of it. What it forms is a sort of commedia dell'arte mask, one typically sees in an 18th century mask ball. Sometimes they're made of leather, and you hold them, and they have these long extended handles, but we're only really seeing half of it. Again, with this one-eyed characteristic, it seems to be entirely consistent with the Harlequin mask, consistent with the idea of a theatrical theme and hiding things. What we're looking at now, it's the image of a horse. It's got very horse-like characteristics. The front legs and the rear legs are suggested in these straggly black lines. The image is flipped over to its right, and you can see the shaded area behind it is very similar to a horse's head. So we've got one leg coming down here, we've got another leg here, sort of bent upwards here. We've got the body coming along. This is sort of suggestive of the mane of the horse, perhaps, the head there, and then coming back, and at the rear end, what's really interesting about this, if one looks at pictures of horses at the gallop, the rear part of their feet goes backwards like this. It's exactly what goes on with horses, and Picasso does this time and again in his depiction of horses. He knew exactly the anatomy of the horse. He loved horses, and they have associations with the mythological world. The horse and the bull, they were the creations of Neptune. He's somehow bringing it all in together. Neptune, underwater, horse, bullfight. You know, he's kind of bringing it all together. And the head and the shoulder area of a bull. Eye here. The horns are sort of represented by the melon. The head coming down here. The shoulders in the front here, and the back coming down here, and the nose of the bull. The disguised cartoon bull image that becomes the horse and many, many other things. Hidden within the folds of that white area that appears to be part of a tablecloth, we can see the impression of two symmetrical triangular wings, almost stick-like body, swooping down, the head with an extended beak, and a beautifully shaped eye in the correct position with a pupil, very similar to what's going on above. Now, what's remarkable about this, there's an almost realistic suggestion of flight, this sense of lift about the whole thing, with the sky and the sun. It's all really fascinating how he does this. Another one of these rather fearful impression of a flying creature with an eagle-like head. Coming back to this story of Set and Osiris and Horus, that story comprises of elements which involve fish and birds. The wife of Osiris transforms into a kite. You have to Wikipedia the story if you're not familiar with it. All this is represented in Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. I think what we're looking at here is a goose. You can clearly see the lines. It's quite distinct. The eye placed in the correct position, and the suggestion of the body and the wings behind it, which would tend to sort of be fairy tale related. This borderline world between reality, imagination, dreams. Coming back to Picasso's depiction of birds, even in Les Demoiselles, he did a number of studies depicting hawks. You can see that he's thinking about birds. He has a tradition of painting such creatures derived from his father's fascination with this. In a sense, the only character that he ever competed with was his father. What I see here is something along the lines of a fruit bat swooping in to have a go at this fruit. One of the darker flying creatures. It's playful, and it seems to be continuing this idea of a fairy tale. And we're back in the realm of light. We've left the sort of dark underworld, and we're back up in the sky. So what I think we're looking at here, there's something along the lines of a blackbird flying along, a very modernistic kind of depiction of a flying horse. Its body has become negative in its outline somehow, a bit like that fractured bird, the one from 1952. I think what we're looking at is an image of Pegasus, which is a play on Picasso's name, as pointed out by Pierre Dax. I think it might be a little bit deeper than just a word play. The name Pegasus, Picasso, there is a similarity. Pegasus is one of Picasso's symbols, one of his personal symbols. It looks to me like it's breathing fire. The association between fire and Pegasus is a very strong one. Pegasus ended up becoming the thunderbolt bearer for Zeus, the overlord of Olympus. Pegasus would carry the lightning bolts, Zeus's preferred weapon. If you look closely, he's put lightning bolts around the perimeter of the frame of this depiction of Pegasus. And so you've got lightning bolts in these highlight areas, zigzagging just like lightning. This is a copy in the Tuileries Gardens in Paris, associating his occult alter ego, Mercury, with Pegasus. There's a similar kind of association going on throughout the art tradition. So what is it about Mercury and Picasso? What's going on? Well, I mentioned Thoth. I mentioned the association through the Harlequin to Mercury and Hermes. Well, we really need to focus on this identity of Hermes Trismegistus, the thrice great Hermes. It was a description of the Egyptian god Thoth, the one who it all comes from, the one who gave us writing, civilization, and art, which was a type of magic. So we've got Picasso, the magician, on our hands here. This is how a lot of people, including Max Jacob and Guillaume Apollinaire, Jean Cocteau, and others, André Malraux, they all knew Picasso was a heavy-duty magician. But certainly the impression of a large bird with black wings spread out with the sky and the clouds. What we seem to be looking at is the head of a seagull, and it incorporates elements that we've talked about earlier, the whale tail, and it's transformed itself into this beak. And so we've got the blackbird inside and all kinds of other elements composing part of the head here. And there's not a great deal I can tell you about it, except it seems to be a seagull, which takes us back to the previous theme with the ocean. It's got the definite sort of pronounced feature of a bird's breast, the body and the wings, almost as if it was wearing an overcoat with a high collar. So it's an extremely cartoon-like representation, and it seems to be wearing a hat and an eye patch. So, okay, how do I justify that? In my work into the hidden imagery of a number of Picasso pictures, what I've learned is that the idea of the tarot comes up time and time again, particularly the three dances, La Danse. There seems to be a central representation of the hanged man. It's a derivation of the upside-down crucifixion of Odin. So we're going back into some pretty deep symbolic associations here. Please bear with me if some of this is over your head or you're not familiar with some of the terminology and things. Okay, now I'm going to attempt to justify this because of the idea that this is a raven. Associated with a raven is the concept of Odin. So we've got an association between Picasso and the southern European equivalent in Mercury, Hermes, and so on. So when I say Odin, you might as well think Mercury. Picasso knew all about Odin. He was very interested in Wagnerian themes, and he liked Wagner's music. He'd encountered this in Barcelona very early on. He incorporates Odinic suggestions throughout his work, particularly this blindness theme. Picasso was conversant with tarot cards. André Malraux calls Picasso's paintings tarots. Odin used to cover an eye. We've got a raven-shaped beak coming down here. We've got the suggestion of the bird here. We've got indications of wings. There was also a hat involved with descriptions of Odin. Since Odin had a pair of ravens. One was thought and the other was memory. And he would send them out all over the world and then come back and have this kind of universal awareness of what was going on. Now, one of the things about Odin was that he was a shamanic god and a shapeshifter. So in this respect, he does resemble Harlequin. There is a certain amount of justification for this to be considered as another bird element in the hidden ornithology of Les Demoiselles. I've shown this to a couple of people, and they also said, yep, that's a chicken. Chickens are particularly relevant. It was the subject of a lot of Picasso's father's paintings. There is another relationship. The rooster was one of the symbols of Mercury. Picasso was very familiar with this mythology. It could be a typical cartoon-like representation of a young chick with two little legs, with its beak open, flying towards this fish symbol here. What we've got is a juxtaposition of a fish being eaten by a bird. This relationship between birds and fish is something that Picasso time and again comes up with. There's a painting which is part of a War and Peace done in the 50s, murals. In one of them, you've got a fish bowl and it's got birds flying around in it. Elsewhere, there's somebody holding a bird cage and it's got fish swimming around inside the bird cage. There are, in Picasso's other work, examples of this confusion between the birds and fish. What I see here is a partially obscured head of a pelican with a blindfold. So let's say one concurred and said, yeah, it looks like there are all these hidden birds. If Picasso was selective, why would he pick that, a blindfolded pelican? Well, the combination of the two escapes me a little bit. What I can say is that the pelican is a symbol for Christ. Way back, long time ago, I think, back in the time of early Christianity, there's this idea of a mother pelican. Her chicks are starving to death. She plucks at her own breast, creates a flow of blood to feed her own young, and then she dies. So she gives her life for the life of young ones. So this is very, very similar to the story of Christ, who died on the cross for our sins and so on. But we've also got a kind of strongly suggestive Osiris relationship where his body is destroyed. At the same time, in the process, he rejuvenates everything. In the destruction of one, the continuation of life can proceed in the generation that follows. It really approaches things like reincarnation. The pelican is a very interesting symbol. Now, the blindfold, a suggested image, we've got a piece of drapery going across the area that I'm saying looks like the head of this bird. In that particular area is where one would suspect the eyes to be. Well, we've talked endlessly now about blindness, so that would suggest relevance. Very beak-like suggestion there in the front, in this silvery part. They catch fish, they put them in the lower part of the beak. A number of reasons why this could well be an intentional image. So what we're looking at here is, again, our friend, the old African mask. It's become a little boat with a little eye-shaped flag, a diamond-shaped sail, if one imagines the mast, going straight through the middle, and a little fleck of water suggested in this white area here, and, you know, sort of wavy kind of line behind it. Again, it refers back to this realm of water and the sea. You've got the sailor who comes into the brothel, Picasso's association with sailors, which is a long-term thing. Picasso depicts himself many times in paintings wearing sailor's garb, and we see this association between the maritime theme and Picasso. Why would it have the eye on it? Well, blindness again, perhaps, giving us a clue, you know, little eye-shaped flag. But we'll come more to that because there's a much deeper interpretation. We've got this impression of something like a phoenix with this massive wing rising to the highest parts of the sky, all nestled right next to the ear of our African friend. A very beautiful image that's been looking at us in the correct orientation for 112 years. We've seen some of the elements of this before. We've got this predominantly white area here that I showed you previously as a fish. It now seems to have transformed into something along the lines of an albatross, and the suggestion of wings in these white areas, which in these selections appear to be fiery. There's another bird that appears to be flying with its wings in this forward perspective. So we've got this idea of things flying across the sky through the imagery. Okay, well, thank you very much for watching. I hope that you found it interesting and that some of these things at least you concur with and you don't think I'm completely mad. There's Les Demoiselles as you've never seen her before, or them, I should say. Okay, so